Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Kalayim. Pei to K, we are still in the middle of Halacha Aleph. We're learning today Daf Mem Vav. We left off on Daf Mem Vav Amid Aleph, all the way on top of the Amid. And we are in middle of challenging Rab Ze'eda's Machave Lechavrayim, when he learned our Mishnah Kerem Shecharat. All the Mishnah spoke about is that if you have vines that were somehow removed from, doesn't matter how, from a vineyard, as long as you have 10 vines left in an area of a Beisah, says the Holy Mishnah, the area still maintains the status of a Kerem. That's what the Mishnah said. Rabbi Ze'eda went ahead and he made an illustration. He delineated. And he said that the Mishnah is speaking about a scenario, as we are already to now on our third day, that you planted a Kerem with 9 rows. Every row is comprised of 7 vines. And as we went through the cheshbon, that means you began with the 63 vine Kerem, and then how the Mishnah broke it down, how you went from there to ultimately 20, and how the final 10 were removed in a disorganized, let's say in a chaotic way. And what we had, according to Rabbi Ze'eda, was a kerem that really is comprised in its core of 2 rows of 3, and the way we are describing it, 2 rows of 3, whoever was looking at the pictures. So in row 3, in row C, let me go milamayla lamata, you have 3, 4, 5. In row E, you have 3, 4, 5. So there are 2 rows of 3, from which 4 tails protrude. One in the north, one in the south, one in the east, and one in the west. Those were the 10 vines that remained. And we began challenging this illustration yesterday by pointing out, and as just to go quickly over what we had, true that there is a area that we tolerate between a minimum and a maximum of space, both between the rows and between the vines. And let's begin, Chevra, with the limit of it cannot be within 4 amas. But if that would be the case, if you're only using a 4 amma between rows and between vines, then we would have a 32 by 24 area, which certainly is not a Beisah. Guys, a Beisah is 50 by 50 or 2,500 square amas. So we went from there, we went to 8. And let me explain to you what the mile of 8 is. And okay, then we have to remember something we learned in the previous chapter, that when you have a kerem cotton, according to the Tanakama, we don't tolerate for the rows to be 8 amas apart, excluding the trunks. If that were to happen, they're disconnected. But once you have a kerem gadol, by a kerem gadol, we tolerate under 16. And as we will see, if don't forget, guys, Rabbi Ze'eda began with 9 rows of 7, and the max space we can tolerate is 8. Why? Why not 16? I'll tell you why not 16. Because Rabbi Ze'eda began, how did we get from the 63 vine vineyard to 20? Because we removed every second row. We removed every second row, both north, south. We removed every second row, east, west. So now you have, if you remove every second row, how much space do you have between the rows? 16. Now 16, including the trunks, which really means a little bit less than 16, since you have, according to Rabbi Ze'eda's demonstration, delineation, more than 3 rows, right? We have more than 3 rows. I'm not talking about at the end, how you went from the 20 to the 10. So therefore, it's still going to be good. But that was the max we can make. So the max we can make was 8 amas, including the trunks. And if you make 8 amas, let me just quickly go back to where we're up to. So if from north to south, 9 rows has 8 intervals. If every interval is comprised of 8 amas, 8 times 8 is 64. 7 rows going, 7 vines in each row, again, using the max of 8. How many intervals do you have in 7 vines? 6 intervals. 6 times 8 is 48. So he began with a kedem of 64 times 48. Problem is, that was the challenge. The Gemara says, the Mishnah says explicitly, we're speaking about 10 left in the area of a Beisah. Means it began in the area of a Beisah. 64 times 48 is not a Beisah. It's more than a Beisah. Now, there were 2 angles to the challenge. Angle number 1 is, it's not 50 by 50. Not 50 by 50 is easy to resolve. That's what we learned yesterday. Because if you have the length of 64 and you have a width of only 48, big deal. Remove from the 64, so to say, add it to the width, and you work it out. And the final 2 by 2, everything was worked out. So fine, gesundheit, but it doesn't resolve the problem. The problem is 50 by 50. A base saw has a total of 2,500 square ams. And the case that Rabbi Zajac used to explain the Mishnah, in which you have a remaining of only 10, there's physically only 10 vines, and it's spread out in the original area of 3,072 square ams, because 64 times 48 is 3072. In other words, you have a surplus. The case of Rabbi Zajac is in an area that's 572 amos more than the Beisah. And that was where we left off yesterday on Daf Mem Hey Amud Beis. That's not yet resolved. That's where we're up to. The Gemara today, again, it's a small daf. We can go through it properly. The Gemara today is going to give 4 more attempted resolutions, and none of them will work. Actually, the Gemara doesn't have a resolution, but as God willing, we'll have time. We will read in the Maharaf Fulda that the second to last solution we'll learn today, the third, is something that he likes to adopt. He says you can still work with that, even though the Gemara didn't make an effort to do so, which is also fine. It's not a tiyufta over here. The Gemara just wants us to become more aware of how important it is to work everything out to the final detail, and when you work it out to the final detail, you got a problem. Okay, so Chevra, the problem is simple. Case that we're giving, if we're using the 8 amma interval, we're having, like we mentioned, a total of 3072. 3072 is a lot bigger than the 2,500 square ams. So Chevra, on top of Daf Memvav, and for here, thank God again, we have the pictures. Thank you, Kevan. And take a look both at diagram A and at diagram B. Leave them both up together. And the Gemara says, ooh, let's begin putting things together. Don't forget that even though the Mishnah speaks about where there is 10 physical vines remaining from the field, Dafke Lashitas Rabbi Yochanan, because of us adding the additional halachic vines, we said we added 6. So actually the configuration that you have of the vineyard, the halachic vineyard, is as you see in the picture. It actually broadens. It's not just 10, it's really 16. And then if you remember, we learned 2 days ago, the Gemara asked, why don't you take it to the next level? Why don't you add 4 additional vines, halachic vines, in all of the 4 corners? And for that, the Gemara says, no, that you cannot do because ein zanav l'zanav. Beautiful. Ein zanav l'zanav means that if you were to measure, based on the measurement that we gave, that the total square amas is 3,072. If you now were to exclude the 4 corners, which might be a solution, and every corner, and you make the cheshbon, it will be exactly 16 by 16 amas. If you add them all up together and you square them, the total of the picture of diagram A is 1,024. 1,024. Now that's great, because we said we have 3,072. So
do you mean the total of the 4 16 by 16s is 1,024?
Yes, the square amas. Yes, Kavan. And now what was the issue is that the case that we are giving of Rabbi Zajac adds up to 3,072. The Mishnah spoke about 2,500. So the Gemara says maybe this is the first attempted answer. We can resolve it by deducting, by removing the corners, Gavaldi. Because now that you have the 10 left over, the 10 left over are not spread out over the entire area of the original vineyard. You're right. The original vineyard, you made the right cheshbon. had 8 amma intervals. The original vineyard was 64 by 48. The original vineyard took up an area more than a Beisah. Doesn't matter. But now that slowly but surely, less and less and less were diminished, and ultimately you have the final 10. Add the 6 halachic vines, add them, and you still have in every corner 16 by 16 amas that we dafke because of the rule that you don't make a zanov to a zanov that you don't add. That's the Gemara's first resolution. Says the Gemara that if you're going to give an answer, kerach means clear out. Don't include in your final cheshbon. Don't include in the final cheshbon. Sheish esrei al sheish esrei for every corner, or 256 square amas in every corner. 16 by 16 is 256 in every corner. Add 256 times 4 is 1,024. The Gemara is going to say that's also not a solution. Why is that not a solution? Now you went from Rav Ze'eda's case being larger than the Mishnah to the same problem on the other side of the counterfeit coin. Now, okay, take 3,072, go minus 1,024. What are you going to have? You're going to have a total of 2,048. 2,048 is 452 square amas less than the Beisah. Weiter doesn't fit. So it's not okay. Gewaldig. If you're going to remove the corners, you went from the problem of, Rav Ze'eda's case is bigger, it went to smaller. Let's go to possibility number 2. It's gewaldig. What's possibility number 2? Now let's really spice things up. What are we spicing things up? That once we have a kedem, and we still have a kedem, even in the case of kedem shachara, we went to the limits. Don't forget, once you have a kedem, Dan, it's not only that you may not plant foreign seed in the kedem, you may not plant foreign seed 4 amas out of the kedem. So if I want to measure the total area that is bound by the kedem, that becomes limited because of the kedem, if you're adding 4 amas on each side, so total you're adding 8 amas. That means if you're looking at this rectangular, so it's not that we said it's 64 by 48. Yeah, that's when you only count the area of the vines. And now, avoidasai shmoina amas. You get it? Bishmoina amas doesn't mean each side 8 amas. It means if you have to the east 4 amas and to the west 4 amas, so what will be the total number? I'll tell you what the total number will be, guys. 64, right? That's the height of the field, right? Because it's 8 intervals of 8. Okay, 64 amas. Add to it 8. You got it, Kevin. How do you have 8? Because in the north, you have to add 4. Because in those 4, you're not allowed to plant foreign seed. In the south, you have to add another 4. So 64 plus 8 is 72. So first of all, begin with a much larger area. Do the same thing in the width. The width, you're right. If you have 7 vines, which have 6 intervals, if they are comprised of 8 amas, 6 times 8 is 48. But again, now that you have a kedem, you have to add both to the east and to the west on each side 4 amas. Totals 8 amas. 48 plus 8, guys, is 56. Now you see diagram B, just to understand the numbers. So you take a look, up, down, 72 amas. Right, left is 56 amas. And guys, let me just give you some numbers. Now, if you're going to, how many square amas is 72 by 56? 4,032. Now, we're not ignoring the first suggestion that we began today's daf with of kerach of sheish esrei al shesh esrei. We're still sticking with that. And as we mentioned, every 16 by 16, every corner is 256 square amas, but we're not going to give that number again. It's not important. Times 4, the number of all of the corners that we deduce is 1,024. So if you are beginning with 4,032 minus 1,024, what do you have left? 3,008. 3,008. Problem with 3,008, again, in other words, we began yesterday by saying we have a surplus of 572. We accomplished something. Now we have a surplus of 508. 3,008. If you take off 2,500, which is the Beisah, you're right. You don't have extra 572. So solution number 2 helped you, but it still didn't get the number of a base up. So you still have extra. That's the problem. No, it's even, again, let's read it inside. Even if you're going to say, you have to deduce the corners. But don't take off 1,024 from 3072. No, take it off from the added 8 amas. Add 8 amas. Take off the 1,024 from 4,032. You have too much. And in other words, ma avidlo. Either way, it's not going to work. If you don't want to deduce the corners, then if you add the avodah, you have 4,032, which is too much, bigger than a besa. If you don't add the avodah, you have 3,072. It's still bigger than the besa. If you're going to say chutz la'avodasei was today's first attempted solution, take off the place of the 4 corners, so you can deduce the 1,024. Well, you can't deduce 1,034, right, from the 3072. You'll have too little. You can't deduce it from the 4,032. You're going to still have too much. In other words, so who not doesn't work. And if you're going to deduce the numbers, or if you're not going to deduce the numbers and you're going to add the avidasai, what did we say? You're going to have the case of Rab Ze'eda is occupying a space of 4,032 square hours, much bigger than a base up. And the Mishnah says, Rab Ze'eda is saying that this case is a case of a base up. Turning to Daf Membav Amid Beis. Ashkach Chaser Chamesh Mavenu Tamya. Right, like we said, because when you deduce the 1,024, the corners from the avodah, what's the total number? 3,008. That's the chasar, and 3,008 versus a beisah is off by 508. 508 of Rab Ze'eda's case. Rab Ze'eda's case has 508 amas more than the Mishnah. Or the Mishnah's case has 508 amas less. That's the words, chasar. That the Mishnah's case is minus chamesh mavin utanya. And ve'im tabin lechutz la'avoidasai, like we mentioned, right? In other words, if you don't even want to add the 4 amas, and not only do you not add the 4 amas, but you deduce the corners, which was suggestion number 1, that means you're beginning from 3,072. But now that Rab Ze'eda explained how vines went missing and went missing and went missing, and ultimately, like because of a oisim zanov lezanov, you don't cheshbin the 4 corners, so you have to deduce 1,024 total corners from the 3072. 3072 is without counting the 4 amas on all sides. So now the Mishnah's case is like we mentioned. If the total will be 2,048. The Mishnah speaks about 2,500. 2,500 minus 2048 is 452. Ashkach Yisar, the Mishnah is giving you a scenario where you can even tolerate an additional 452. 452, that's the Gemara's Kash. So both solutions did not work. And now we're going to give another 2 solutions. And none of them will work out on the Gemara perfect. Now here you see the brilliance of the Chachamim. What are we looking for? We're looking to get to a place that Rab Ze'eda gave, that after you take off the every second row north-south, every second row east-west, which you have 20, and you remove the final 10th way Rab Ze'eda described, the halachic vineyard is in a base up. Let's work our way backwards. And there will be 2 ways of doing it. Very simple. Kavan, one way is that you're going to say that the space between the vines in the case of Rab Ze'eda is more than the 8 amas. Now, the moment you give it more than 8 amas, doesn't bother me in the original vineyard, like we mentioned, based on what we learned in the previous chapter, that according to the Tanakama, that if you have a Kedem Godoil, as long as the rows are within 16 amas, you're good. But don't forget that you are losing a complete row, both north-south. You are losing a complete row east-west. So whatever you are beginning with, you have to double it. So the moment, if you're looking for a solution, like Rabbi Zachav's case is only covering 2048. I mean, we're going with today's first answer. What's today's first answer? That, yeah, you're right. 64 by 48 is 3072 minus 1024 because you don't have the corners. Okay, the problem is now what do you have left? You have left the 10 actual vines plus the additional 6 halachic vines are taking up 2048. 2048 is not a base up. So one solution would be, which is today's solution number 3, ube muflagois. Put the original vines further apart than 8 amas. Now the Gemara doesn't give you the exact number, but the our Chachamim worked it out. And let me tell you how they worked it out. They said if the remaining vines, Keva, not the original vines have to be just a little bit more than 8 amas. But now that you're missing every row, if the distance between each row and the other, and same distance between each vine, actual vine and the other, is 17.68 amas, exactly 1768, then the total area would be, listen to these numbers, of the north-south 70.72. The total square amas of the width will be 53.4. The total amount will be 3759. But now let's go back to today's first suggestion. Remove the corners. What is the corners? If you remove it, it won't be the same number. When we gave the number of 16 amas by 16 amas, right? A totaling, we said 1,024. That's all premised on the vineyard being spread out exactly originally 8 amas one from the other. That's how you come.
Right. That's 17.68.
What's going to happen right now is that the total square amas of the corners will total to 1,250.3. And if you deduct 1,250.3 from 3,750.9, you're going to have 2,500. So in other words, I can get you to exactly base on if the vines were lachatchila planted a little bit more than 8 amas apart, a little bit more, which means now that you removed every row, the remaining vines are distance 17.68. But there's a problem with that. What's the problem with that? Says the Gemara. No, we learned in the previous chapter that even by the Kedem Gadol, we don't go with the share of 8 amas excluding the trunks. We do go with the share of 16 amas excluding the trunk. I know that whenever we are cheshboning in our Pedic, we are including the trunk. But 17.68 will not allow for the rows nor for the vines to be enough close for them to be connected. They will therefore asks the Gemara, ki yechidi yoishein. They will be judged as individual vines. Individual vines doesn't have a din of a ket. So solution number 3 is make the distance a little bit more, and again, deduct the corners. That won't work. Final attempt will be is in Tamer Beroitze. Have a simpler solution. What was the issue yesterday and today with before you deduct the corners? Before you deduct the corners, what did we say? That it's too big. The Rabbi Zachav's case is too big. But now the Gemara has a great answer. The great answer will be is, why are you making it too big? You said that you can put within 4 amas and 8 amas, l'kula alma, you have yourself a vineyard. Why do you have to go all the way to the 8 amas? And now you are beginning with 64. Why do you have to do that? Don't do that. Why don't you go that the space between the vines, now that you removed every second row, is now 14.3. Guys, 14.3 is not 16 amas. It's less than 16 amas. It doesn't create yechidiyos. You're good. And if you begin with that number, I want you to know, with the corners, if you begin now with 14.3, you're going to have an area of 65.2. of length times 50.9 of width, which will total square amas 3318.68. If you will now deduct the four corners that you are deducting won't have a total of 1,024 because the whole area to begin with is smaller. When you add all of the four corners together based on each row and each vine, now that you removed every second one is 14.3, it will give you a total of 817.96. And you know what you're going to have? If you deduct that from 3318.68, you're going to have exactly 2,500. So this is the best answer.
Why not do this from the beginning?
I know, no, because this answer is the worst answer. Oh,
okay.
So in other words, you made it too big. You are allowed to go until 8 amas. Ooh, it's too big in Abzeida's case. Okay, make it a little bit smaller. Says the Gemara, you can't do that. Why can't you do that? Because in other words, the Mishnah is indicating that if the vines are spread over an area more than a base saw, if 10 spread, they do not combine. If the vines in our Mishnah are not speaking about a case where they're spread out to the maximum, because don't forget, the maximum is 16, including the trunks. If you are telling me that the vines are only spread out 14.3 amas, then what were to happen, Keva, if you would spread them out maximum? If you take the case of he gave a case, okay, it was 14.3, but I'm allowed to make a kedem with the configuration that we have, this weird configuration, 2 rows and 4 tails. I'm allowed to do it spread out 16 amas, including the trunks, and it's still called a kedem. If I were to do that, then it would be bigger than a beisah. And why would that not be good? Why is the Mishnah insisting on a beisah? When we already know, Kevan, that I am allowed to plant one row and the other, right? It's 8 amas with the trunks, allowing me to remove entire rows and still have a kedem. So Rab Ze'eda gave a case. So what? That if in his case, the Chacham, the farmer, planted it 14.3. But since you are allowed to plant it in the distance of max 16, including the trunks, if you were to do that, you have yourself a halachic vineyard. It's made out of 10 vines, and it's spread over an area for more than a beisah. Why would it not be good? The Mishnah is telling you that you can tolerate 10 vines in the area of a beisah. He gave a case that if you use his case, you should be allowed to have 10 vines even in an area bigger than a beisah. So don't tell me that his case happened to be where you planted it closer to the other. No, and therefore, let's read the top words of Daf Mem Zayin. The Gemara is saying, I don't know how to learn Rab Ze'eda. We can't learn the Mishnah like Rab Ze'eda. Look inside the top Marafulda. Have in Yiddish, it comes out, the only way would be is going back to solution number 3. This is important. This is so ruled out because again, if you happen to plant them closer together, you got it, Kevin. Since you are halachically allowed to plant it a bit more apart, without it being disconnected, because it's going to have the rule of under 16 excluding the trunks, or exactly 16 including the trunks, that is a kedem. So it could take up an area of a beisah. There's no answer for that. The only answer that Marafulda says, the only answer is that actually Rab Ze'eda was speaking about a case where after you removed every second row, they are apart 17 amas 0.68. That's called bimuflagois. That's the only way you can answer it. But the problem with that is that if Rab Ze'eda's vineyard was where they planted it really a little bit more than 8, so when you double it, it's a little bit more than 16, but that's not good. There's a cutoff point. And therefore, it should turn into yechidiyos. The Marafulda is writing this last line because what he's telling you is that Rab Ze'eda's case was where they actually planted it a bit more separate. Problem is, how is that called a kedem? So we're going to conclude today's share by going back to Daf Mem Vav Amid Beis. Look inside the Marafulda. It's a middle, guys. It's one big Marafulda, but the second line under the little Amid in the Gemara. Second line, Avol Ha'emes. In other words, the Gemara is not saying Tiyufta. We're saying it's difficult to learn, but there is a solution. There's a chiddush the Gemara doesn't want to say. But what would be the way out? There's one way out, which has a novelty. Kiven shuhur oitzeit shahabeisa mitztarfon choyel vehein einon mifuzarim rak esel beisa. Says the Manaful, the big chiddush. Again, the Gemara is not saying it as a definite, but this is what Rab Ze'eda must have meant. Rab Ze'eda knew all of the cheshbon that we made. Rab Ze'eda said by giving his machave lachavraya a huge chiddush. Yes, we learned in a Mishnah, not Tana. What did we learn in the Mishnah? That the most you can separate vines and the rows from each other in a kerem gadol, the most is 16, under 16, or let me say 16, including the trunks. He says that if you have a vineyard that ends up having in an area of a beisa 10, somehow that amount of land plus the fact that you have 10 or more, it combines them. We tolerate a little bit more than the 16 amma cutoff point.
Why?
Because what are we looking for? We're looking for one general thing, that when a person takes a look at that plot of land and they see a lot of vines, psychologically, they should see a vineyard. They should not see individual vines. So if you have the right alignment, even though it's only 2 rows that are rightly aligned, and you do have 10 is not, just for the record, a kerem gadol is 9. It's 3 rows of 3. You have 10. Somehow, because of the number 10 and the areas, so to say, only a beisa, it allows it to still be combined. We're not going a lot above the limit. We are only going, instead of 16 to 17.68.
Does it make a difference to somebody looking from above?
From the outside, I think that's what he's trying to say. People don't have these eyes that they 16 amas or 17.68. They don't see it that well. So he allowed for the shear to be a bit bigger, l'chumra, making it into a vineyard. Now the Gemara doesn't have to say that, but that in other words, the Manaful is saying that from all of the proposed solutions that the Gemara rejected, the one that is most workable is today's solution number 3. And again, combined with today's solution number 1, means you are beginning with a vineyard that has 70.72 by 53.04. You're beginning with that. Now you have to deduct the 4 corners. When you deduct now that you deducted the 4 corners, you have exactly 2,500 square amas, and you have yourself a beisa. And that's exactly what Rab Ze'eda was teaching his students. And with that, we'll say a big mazel tov to the sugya, and God willing, tomorrow to be continued.
Question, Rabbi?
Yes.
Quick question.
Quickly.
So what's the whole point of mentioning 16 amos? We made a very big deal about 16, including the trunk.
I know. That's why the Gemara didn't want to say it. That's why the Gemara didn't say that's the answer. The Manaful is saying it has to be that. The Gemara is rejecting. The Gemara is rejecting that. But what did Rab Ze'eda made these cheshbonos? Rab Ze'eda, by giving his students this story, this configuration, he was innovating another nuance, and that is that where you have left 10, as long as they are within a beisa, not more, we put them together, even though you went above, a little bit above.
Okay, so back to the question of what is the deal about having the 2,500 then? Why do you need 2,500?
2,500 is fixed in stone. That's a base. Beisa is like a very important tract of land.
Okay, so that's got it.